Moderator of this session, my friend Suresh Babu, my co-panelist Shri Nandakumar ji, Madhu ji, T.P. Sen Kumar sir, all the eminent esteemed guests here, brothers and sisters. I'm glad that this session is taking place after the session on academia. And in a way, Shakarankutti sir's assertion is a continuation of earlier session, what the fraud academia has done, which is indirectly impacting media. But I have a serious issue with calling this everything as anti-national. Because sometimes, by getting into this binary of, the national and anti-national, we miss the real point. There is a ideological battle going on about the idea of Bharat. And that idea of Bharat fundamentally has three constructs. The first construct was the British construct, which unfortunately carried forward by the Nehruvian Congress, which said that India is nation in the making. Nehru said so on 15th of August in his famous speech, Tryst with Destiny, and he continued to say so till 1960s. So, fundamental belief that before arrival of British, there was no India or no Indian nationhood. Then there is a second construct that started in 1920s and which has impacted Kerala the most, starting from my alma mater JNU, the communist ideology, which fundamentally which doesn't believe in idea of nationhood, frankly speaking, which believe only in class struggle, and said that India was never a nation, India can never be a nation, India is a conglomeration of many nationalities, at the most. So the idea of slogan called Tukde Tukde Gang was not new. The seeds were sown in 1920 itself. Communist Party was the first party to support the resolution of creation of Pakistan, remember. So partition was nothing for them. And there has been a third thought, which since times of pre-Vedas believe that this land starting from Himalayas to Indian Ocean and from west of Indus, that is up to at least the Iran border to present day Myanmar, has been a sacred land blessed with unique culture, expressed in terms of diversity, but still celebrate inherent unity, and that land is called Bharatvarsha. Remember, the fundamental battle is about these three ideas of Bharat. India, that is nation in the making. India was never a nation, India can never be a nation, and India has been a cultural, spiritual entity since time ages, which has always celebrated diverse expression of same unity. Now, what has happened? In the colonial period, media has evolved as an extension of the academic fraud started by the British. I'm sure Nandakumarji must have mentioned this in the inaugural session about the entire fraud of Asiatic society, then James Mill's book on India's history or history of British India, which became a sort of mandatory text for every officer coming to India. And eventually Indian elite, both in academia and media and even for that matter politics, started believing that construct. And there the fundamental problem started. Though there was an intellectual resistance to it, whether in the form of Hindu Mela or whether in the form of Hindu chemistry, Hindu polity, or Swadeshi Samaj or Hind Swaraj, all these were manifestation of intellectually challenging the British narratives. But post Khilafat, what has happened that Indian elite virtually accepted the intellectual and cultural supremacy of Bharat, and that mental and intellectual psychological subjugation of India persisted in the post-independent period, and that is the biggest problem. I remember first time with Nandakumarji under the aegis of Pragya Pravaha, we started this entire discussion on decolonization. And first time, we tried to bring this thing together. This entire business of cutting south is nothing but the continuation of the process of colonization through cultural and mental subjugation. Remember, the first map of Federation of South India was not released from Kerala or any of the Indian states. It was released from some Norwegian university. Then 4 PhDs came from Europe on South India. Then their economic significance, their cultural diversity. But what are the roots? The first differentiation started in 1828. First time Indian languages were divided. India was ethnically and racially mapped virtually by Asiatic society. And the Indian languages, there were 2 important thinkers which many a times we don't even study. There was one guy called Wilkins who was associate of William Jones. Wilkins is the first person who translated Bhagavad Gita. And can you even imagine what he is trying to argue in it? He is saying that Bhagavad Gita was a revolt of Vedic polytheism to establish monotheism, which is closer to Christianity. Now, this kind of interpretation, many times we don't even realize that what does it mean and what can be the possible repercussions. Now it doesn't stop here, because in 1816 and 1818 when James Mill comes with his that famous 6 volumes on British history of British India. First time he divides Indian history into Hindu history, Muslim history and British history. And while doing that, he is making a case for British colonization. He is justifying British colonization of India. He is saying that as Aryans visited or invaded India and the invasion continued, where do these liberals and left meet together? Their fundamental belief that India was never a nation, 1. 2, India doesn't have history of its own. If at all India has a history, it's a history of incessant invasions. And I'm quoting the master of all these frauds called Karl Marx. 1853. He says, India has no history of its own. If at all there is a history, it is a history of incessant invasions. So Aryan invaded, Greek invaded, Shaka, Huna, Arab, Turk, Mongol, Portuguese, Dutch, French, British. How does it matter? There are only two original communities, inhabitants here. As we did to the US or Latin America, Aryans did to Indian land. So tribals and Dravidians are the only original people. All are outsiders. So how does it matter if we are ruling you? So this fundamental fraud of representing history from British point of view is the major problem that started first in the British academic history and as an extension to the same in media. So my premise is entire academia and media see India from non-Indian point of view. They don't have understanding of what Indian nationality is. Because what British did, and which is fundamentally different from earlier invasions, remember, if you take the world map and draw lines, who started from where, you will realize that all over the world, within on an average 30 to 50 years after the Arab or European invasion, the local civilization virtually got destroyed. Whether the US, whether Latin America, whether Africa, whether Australia, Bharat is the only exception. After 17 major invasions on this land and some losses in terms of convergence and division of or partition of India, still we survived with the original idea of Bharat. What was so special in our thought process, in our culture, that we could survive this onslaught could never become the fundamental issue of academic inquiry and media propagation. And therefore, the issue of seeing India, whether in academic prism or media prism, essentially remain non-Indian. There is one more person who was responsible to this, and again, unless we address these fundamental questions, we will not be able to correct the things either in academia or in media or in society. So there was an attempt to do, or to write rather, a chronology of, or rather what he called as the Hindu chronology. Now why this Hindu chronology business is important? Because through Hindu chronology, first time ever, the timeline of Hindu history was defined. And it was capped as, the capping was done at 5,820 years. Because the first Hebrew Bible is supposed to be come out 5,700 as per the Hebrew. So the monotheistic linear history of all Abrahamic religions has the origin maximum 5,780. So anything before that is mythology. Now the problem happens once you accept this premise and then the idea of nation state emerging in 1648 with the Treaty of Westphalia. Up to that, there are only two divisions. One is the period of, what they called as the ancient period, where there were various revelations, then the Dark Age, and the so-called modern age. Even calling somebody in Indian context just on the basis of timeline as modern is problematic, sir, whether Rajaram Mohan Rao or not. Because if the question of modernity was critical inquiry and rationality, we always had that. Modernity in Indian context cannot be on the basis of time, because time has a different context in India, unlike Europeans. And in terms of scientific inquiry, the first question they are fighting, whether Earth is flat or spherical. That was the scientific question they are dealing with. Whether Copernicus or Galileo or Bruno. And they are calling it science. They are calling it modern. They are not telling us, and we are also not telling our students, whom are they asking this question? To the church? Why? Because on the basis of Bible, church was interpreting that the earth is flat and the sun is revolving around earth. And these were the people whom now we call scientists, were called as heretics, burnt, jailed. Why? Because they said earth is spherical and not flat, and not sun is revolving around, but the earth is revolving around sun. This is their fundamental question of so-called modernity. 15th century, 16th century, they are debating over this. And we call it modern. When did first time in Indian languages the study of geography and the universe started? And what were the terms used for that? You also study geography in Malayalam. What do you call the subject? Bhugola Shastram? Bhumi Shastram? Bhumi, Bhugola, these are the words we have been using for thousands of years. So because our scientists and rishis knew that earth was spherical and the universe was spherical. But we call it modern just because it is European. The point is, the modernization has been equated with westernization, and that's why anything that is non-western can be denigrated, can be abused, can be mocked, has become a fashion. So somebody standing in political alliance with Yogi Adityanath becomes communal, and somebody standing with OVC becomes secular. Who defined this? What is the criteria? Means if separation of religion and state was the criteria, then in entire Hindu history, state was always separate from religion. But we started intellectually accepting these terms as the sole interpretation of modernity, unless we challenge this, both in academia and media. And the fundamental basis for this should be the national understanding of Bharat. Bharat stood on certain fundamental principles. It is not just a geographical entity. It has been a worldview. It has been a life view. A view that believes that this life is an integrated approach. The expansion of consciousness from individual to family to social to national to universal is the fundamental process of life. So our life has never been in terms of binaries. We do not have the criteria called believer and non-believer. or on the basis of Iman and Kafir, because we fundamentally believed on the concept of spiritual democracy. Not just political democracy, not just social democracy. This is the only land where everybody has a right to choose his or her own God. We have a right to choose the path to reach to that God. We have to right to create new God. We have a right to declare a living being a guru and a God. We have a right to declare ourselves a God. And we have also right to say, I don't believe in God. And still nobody will kill you. Still you can be Hindu and can propagate and practice your own path with all kinds of logic and shastrartha. That is Hindu way of life. That is original idea of Bharat. Unfortunately, in academia and media, we have not articulated and intellectually invested enough to challenge the colonial construct. They are not anti-national constructs. They are essentially non-national constructs. They are non-Indian constructs. They are non-Bharatiya constructs. We need to challenge them with solid Bharatiya constructs so that media persons get courage to build their arguments and stories around the real idea of Bharat, which is based on the inherent unity since ages. Day before yesterday, UP Chief Minister Yogi Adityanath made one important and in media sense a provocative statement. But that is a fundamental statement, and it should become a mantra for not just for media but also for academia. Batoge to katoge. If you are divided, you will be cut off. Cut off not physically only, but even in terms of land, in terms of conversion, in terms of psychology, in terms of spirituality, in terms of your mental health, everything will be cut off. So, batoge to katoge, if you are divided on various caste, linguistic, regional lines, you will be cut off into pieces. If you are, the next sentence he said, ek rahoge to nek rahoge. If you are united, then only you will survive. The forces who left India but still want to control India, want India to be submissive to the same colonial thinking and processes, are now interfering in various ways. This is not just a political question. This is a social, cultural, intellectual challenge that we have to take up. On the one hand, we are rising as a nation. We are self-asserting ourselves. We are trying to live as per our Atma, soul. And that's why the concept of Atmanirbharta is not just economic. It is fundamentally spiritual. But there are many forces who do not like this to happen. And therefore there are tactical alliances, there are strategic alliances. And there will be a lot of, hue and cry that will take place around this fundamental reassertion of Bharat with Bharatiya values. That is why specifically targeting South, specifically targeting Ayodhya, specifically targeting certain communities, women, family as an institution. Media just become a means. Please understand, media is just a medium. There is a thought process behind it. I'll just refer to one news that emerged today in one of the American media publications. But unfortunately, because I represent English media, and American media defines what Indian English media thinks, and then Indian English media decides how other Indian media in other languages should think. So a headline of, there is in Texas, in the US, a huge Hanumana Murti has come up with the initiative of Hindu community. What is the headline? Huge half monkey, half human statue in Texas sparks conservative backlash. Half monkey, half human statue and conservative backlash. Conservative of whom? Who's conservative? Why backlash? Who decided you to name our Murti, our God, our belief as half monkey? We can't even talk about your fundamental text. We can't even talk about your prophet. Can we even mention that a bearded person was hanged on a cross while describing Jesus? Can any media even dare to do so? Anywhere in the world? But the problem is with this fundamental thought process and timeline that anything that is prehistoric can be mocked, can be abused, and the same applies to the people, same applies to the land. So it is not just about media, it is about society, decolonization of our mind, renationalization of our mind, and through renationalization, unless we question them, unless we boycott them, unless we write back to them, unless we expose them, and then creatively give our alternatives, stand behind the brands like Kesari, who stand with the national outlook as a national outlook of media, in media, despite all odds, we will not be able to shape our mind, national consciousness on national thought. This kind of initiative in the Delhi conclave also, I was part of it. This kind of initiative by Kesari will start this intellectual churning, and Bharat has a unique ability to reinvent itself, keeping the fundamental thoughts intact. I'm sure Kesari's initiative will reassert that process in this pious land of Shankara and reassert true idea of Bharat, not just for Bharat, but for the world. Thank you. Thank you.
Powered by Jyotis. Realizing your dream home. Our ongoing luxury apartments projects are Crown near Karivattam, The Square near UST Global, White Manor near Aattugal Ambalatra, and Evergreens Luxury Villas near Tirumala. Call 90482 55599. Jyotis Building Promoters Private Limited, Thiruvananthapuram.